Welcome to the panel on identity threat and cybersecurity. My name is Misako Fiedler from Slavic Studies, and I will be kind of moderating the discussions. This is on identity threat and the cybersecurity, and at the same time, it's about the Czech language and identity in the globalizing world. We really appreciate your physically coming to this panel in spite of the weather and falling trees. We appreciate it. We would also like to extend our welcome to the audience who are watching us through the webcast from different places of the world, especially Lucia Hindelsová. I think, Lucia, you probably are there, for the Deputy General Counsel of the Czech Republic in New York, and perhaps Cvrček, the General Counsel of the Czech Republic in New York. Thank you for your support. Before starting this event, I wanted to talk about our motivations behind the event. First, we would like to present the relevance of the Czech Republic with respect to identity and security. This will be addressed in more detail by Vaclav Cvrček. Identity is also a key moment in language diaspora, about which Lida Cope is going to talk and discussing in migration. It is also important for us to hold this event very close to the foundation of the Republic Day, which is October the 28th, tomorrow. Second, we wanted to put linguistics on a map when talking about global issues. Linguistic analysis of text and speech has not been, in my view, noted very well. It is also because linguists might be working in a bubble, but I'm hoping that this panel will start our continuous discussion between linguists and historians in security studies. I must also acknowledge our gratitude to many people and institutions outside and inside of Brown that helped put together this panel. First and foremost, to the General Consulate of the Czech Republic in New York, the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Brown Office of Global Engagement. This event was actually funded by these two units. Also, the event was also made possible thanks to the Memorandum of Understanding between Brown University and Charles University in Prague. We would also like to thank the Watson Institute and the Department of Slavic Studies for co-sponsoring the event. Let me introduce the speakers and discussants very briefly. Professor Lida Cope, sociolinguist at East Carolina University, there. She's been heavily involved in language documentations, and she works with Robert Dittman from Charles University and the Czech National Corpus at Charles University. So Professor Cope is also related to Charles University. Professor Vaclav Cvrček is a corpus linguist, discourse and analyst, and does many things at Charles University in the Czech Republic. He's a longtime research collaborator for me. And Professor Ivan Arguentoft is from the Watson Institute. His expertise is in cybersecurity, and we're looking forward to discussions and lively discussions. Professor Holly Case is sitting there, is from the Department of History and specializing in modern Europe and the relationship between foreign policy, social policy, science, and literature. Both professors work with members of Charles University under the auspices of our memorandum. So we'll start with the two talks first, and then this will be followed by questions and comments by the discussants. And then we'll open up and take questions from the floor, and I will keep an eye on the YouTube live streaming where some questions might pop up. So I'll be very quick, and we would like to welcome first Professor Vaclav Cvrček.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Mako, for organizing this event. I'll be actively drinking from time to time so that you can see my face, like now. So. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, or the title of my talk is Disinformation in Cyberspace, and you can think of many cyber threats, like, malware, spyware, identity theft, and distributed denial of service attacks, and so on. But I won't talk about that. A, because I'm not a cyber expert or computer science expert, and B, because I think there is a difference between these types of cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns, on which I will focus mostly in my talk. The greatest difference, at least for me, is that these are more or less one-time attacks targeting individuals or institutions, whereas disinformation campaigns are in its own, from their own nature, like are long-term activities to induce chaos in the target state. So that's something different. And also there are other things, but we usually frame these activities into a term like hybrid warfare, and I will focus mainly on hybrid warfare in the Czech Republic. Now, hybrid warfare is, by definition, using a wide range of non-violent actions to create chaos into target state. So it's like something like hoaxes, disinformation, and there is sometimes a difference or distinction between hoaxes, which is something which is false, and disinformation, which is also a false information, but also with the intention to harm, and malinformation, which is only to make someone feeling bad. And if you combine all those things together, or many hoaxes together, disinformation, you get a conspiracy theory, which in a way represents a way how to look at and explain the world around us. And so if you think about these phenomena, they are all text-based. So it calls for linguistic analysis. And in a sense, this is an opportunity for us, I mean, those who are embedded in humanities, because if it is a war, and in a sense it is, and if it is words which are used instead of bullets, then it makes sense to consult it with people from the humanities, because reading texts and interpreting text is something which is in the very core of our mission as people from humanities. So it makes sense to look at it from the perspective of historian, literary studies, and linguist. That's my field from where I come. And I would also like to show you that it makes sense, even though you do not know anything about Czech or Czech Republic, to look at specifically at the Czech situation, because Czech situation is unique in a sense that it's on the border of the former Eastern Bloc, as you can see. And due to that, it is still, or appears to be, according to our intelligence services, a strategic location for intense Russian intelligence, Chinese intelligence activities. So, in a sense, the Czech case is a unique case, not only for that reason, but also because Czech has quite an advanced resources for this type of analysis, as you'll find out later on. What I'm going to talk about are anti-system web portals. I will not give you a definition. What do I mean by anti-system web portals? But we know from our intelligence services or Ministry of Interior or other non-profit organizations such as Endowment Fund of Independent Journalism that these portals are characteristic for spreading disinformation and pro-Russian propaganda. They usually do not have clear ownership. They usually do not provide us with the names of the authors, or the editorial team is unknown, and sources are often missing or are irrelevant in the news. So these are the characteristic features you can Google if you Google just the term anti-system web portals, but it is not something. It is not a definition which can be actually operationalized. to harvest the texts which are interesting for us in this analysis. So we have to start with the data, I assume. What I would like to show you now is a unique project, which is the latest project of the Czech National Corpus, and it's called Corpus Online, and it's a large database of texts which aims to monitor or map the dynamic content of Czech internet. And it contains online media from all sources, not just, you know, those anti-system, but also mainstream media. It also contains discussion forums, internet, and so on, internet forums, or some social networks such as Facebook and Twitter, but you know, Facebook changed the policies quite recently, so we have to skip this, and it covers the whole, the quite large range of dates. So it's from February 2017 till the March. Now we're experiencing some kind of hiatus in the coverage, but hopefully we will be able to find a new, or we did already find a new data provider, so we will keep on and keep on with the coverage. Now, if you can imagine a database of texts which is updated on a daily basis, so there are 4.5 million words each day from all sources of the Czech internet, and it provides you with the opportunity to sit with your morning coffee and to look for the yesterday's agenda and find out how it was portrayed or framed in different parts of online media. It comes with some annotation, which is technical stuff, and I would not bother you with that. The important thing here is that it comes also with some sort of a classification of sources. And this classification, or the media typology we used, is based on a similarity of audiences. This is really important, and I would say quite innovative approach to this. It's based on a research done by Josef Schlerka and his team. And what he did is that he combined three types of information. He combined the information about how the web portals are interlinked, what are the visitors of the websites, which is information which is accessible via Alexa Rank service, and also, and that's the most important part, he also combines the information about who shares and likes the content. So he was able to cluster the media portals according to the fact that they are read by similar people, not by some linguistic characteristics, not by a political stance, but just simply by the fact that they are read by the similar segment of the population. So what he does is this kind of networks. This is one way how to look at the data. There are lots of them, and he comes up with a set of clusters, which can be labeled A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, but you know, it would not be convenient to work with these labels. So we labeled them according to a prototype portal. So there are mainstream media, or different types of mainstream media, and there are anti-system media, which can be then later characterized by some political stance, such as they are pro-Kremlin, anti-EU, anti-NATO, anti-establishment, and so on. They are also characterized by fast cloning of texts. That's a practice which is quite massively used by anti-system media, that one portal produces a text. Often it is a translation from an English source, and then the text is cloned by other anti-system portals. And they also are, they can be characterized by something which is inauthentic, coordinated sharing. So you can calculate on social networks what is the time span between sharing of one story on Facebook, for example, and then you can compare it for different contents. Colleagues of Josef Schlerka did this for these anti-system portals and find out that the span between individual sharing is uniquely short. So it is a hint that there is some coordination going on. And so it may be coordinated by someone. We don't know. What I'm going to talk about is linguistic analysis of these anti-system web portals. And I would like to focus on 3 things. First of all, we can look at what topics is in the focus of anti-system media that shows us something about the ideological partiality of the portal. We can look at specific agenda if there is any. So we can look whether they spread actually some disinformation and conspiracies, and what are they. And we can also look, and that's the most interesting part for me, the discourse spins, the fact that they actually evaluate things differently. They making spins, and sometimes they reframe events differently. So that's something I would like to focus on in this talk, but that's not what I did by myself. It's a long-term collaboration with Marco Fiedler. Usually with this slide, I have a little photo here, but since Marco's here, you can look at it. No, it's not just my work. And if you find anything really brilliant, it's often Marco's idea. So how do we do it? What we do with the text is that we harvest keywords out of them. And that's a quite common analytical technique used by corpus linguists. It basically does a simple thing. It calculates the frequency, the number of occurrences of words in a text, and compare the frequency of the word with the frequency the word has in a general reference corpus. So what we are looking for here is words which are overrepresented by the text. And these keywords usually tell us something about the topic of the text. Sometimes they also refer to genre or register. But if you carefully select a reference corpus, which is of the same, if it is if the reference corpus is of the same register as the target text you're analyzing, then this influence is leveled out, and what you get is just the topics, and that's that's where our interpretation starts. These keywords, as Mike Scott, who coined this method in 2006, has said, keywords are just pointers. They do not give you the whole story, the whole interpretation. You have to look it up, look the word up in the text and find out how it actually is used in the text and find out what role it plays in the discourse. But they are the, nice starting points in the analysis. Now, if we look at keywords in anti-system and mainstream media in the period from October 2017 to October 2018, and compare it with the general reference corpus of Czechs in 2015, we'll find out in the mainstream, like these words, according to president, government, say Babiš, that's the name of our former prime minister, election, court, party, Zeman, that's the name of our president, chairman. These are, this is the normal domestic political agenda you'll find out. There's also the according to, which is a word which is often used in the newspaper discourse because they want to acknowledge their sources. And if you look at anti-system, you'll get quite different view. So the topics most interesting for anti-system is Russia, USA, president, Russian, American government, political, war, country, EU. You do not have to go any deeper to find out that there is something going on, that there is a difference, definitely, and that anti-system media tend to deal with specific aspects of international events. They are not interested in domestic events. For example, you will not find, weather forecast in anti-system media or results of football match. So they are interested in geopolitical events, and especially in the main players, the superpowers, so to say. But Russia is also, of course, it's not in the top 10, but Russia is also a topic for mainstream. So if we look at those topics which are really, really unique to anti-system, which do not appear in the mainstream media, it's this list. It's a sample only, but to give you some impression. So Anglo-Zionist, apostate, that's a keyword which actually refers to Pope Francis, which is perceived as heretic and apostate. Russiagate, that's a word related to the Russian collusion in US election. Amy, Havelish, pejorative word, dollarization, Judeo-Masonic, Armageddon, something like reference to nuclear Armageddon. Anti-Russian stance are often explicit here in anti-system. So these are the topics which are interesting for anti-system media, and we can harvest those topics by quantitative methods. Now, we will not focus further on these things. Rather, we would like to, or we focus on the association among topics. So one thing to look at anti-system media is to look at what interests them. The other thing is what are the concepts of shared interest by mainstream and anti-system, and how differently they frame the same event. Now, for this purpose, we adopted this method, from shopping online. It's called market basket analysis, and what it does is sifts through lots of transactions to find out what people buy together. So it, in a sense, tries to find out if there is an association between items in the market basket and shopping cart, and it gives you these suggestions. If we apply this method, this text mining or data mining method to texts, it may look like this. So we take each individual text, identify keywords within each individual text, and we look for systematic associations between keywords, between topics. And these do not have to be necessarily adjacent. It does not have to be like, Soviet Union, like two words in a close context. These can be two topics which are really far from each other in the text, but they systematically appear. Now, market basket analysis gives us the result of market basket analysis is associative link, which is the form of antecedent and consequent, and can be read like, for example, if the text contain word A, B, C, it will most probably contain also the word D, and so on. This gives us the information about how individual words are used in which context, and most importantly, which topics actually correlate. And this can be also evaluated by some variables such as support, confidence, and lift, which out of them, lift is the most important one and gives us the information about the strength of the association. So, for example, if we take the word migrant in Czech, migrant in English, and if we look at associative links with this word in anti-system in the period from June to September 2020, you'll find out that there are words such as illegal, asylum, country, European migration, European border, and so on. So these are the topics which are associated with the keyword migrant. Sometimes we found out that sometimes it is more convenient to work with associative arrays. So we take all the words related to a word, for example, the word migrant, and create an associative array, a list of all associated words. And we analyze this array because this array, in a sense, is the frame, the discursive frame of the migrant in anti-system. This associative array is then compared with a similar array of the same word in mainstream, and the analysis comes out of this comparison. Now, I will like to show you 3 strategies of anti-system. Hopefully I have time, still some time. And first of them, we call the first of them zone flooding, and it's called in inspiration to this quote by Steve Bannon. And in a sense, he was right, because that's actually what the anti-system does. And if we stick to the word migrant, and if we look at how much attention it draws in different media segments, you'll get this picture. So there are, okay, it works. There are, I don't know, 250 texts in mainstream media which has migrant as a keyword, apart from or against almost 500 texts in anti-system. So anti-system focuses more on migration, but if you look at the relative numbers, it's even, it's not twice, but it's 3 times more. That's one piece of information. Let's keep it. But the zone flooding comes here. If we look at links in which migrant is involved, you'll find out that there is a difference. It's a factor of 6 or 7. There are far more associations related to migrant in anti-system than it is in mainstream. And the average or median strength of each individual link is stronger in the mainstream, while very weak or somewhat weak in the anti-system. So this pattern may be regarded as flooding because the anti-system tries to connect the topic of migration with many other topics which can potentially be perceived as as something dividing the society apart. So it might piggyback on the topic of migration to expound other topics such as Islamization of Europe, racism, conspiracies about NGOs, the EO in disarray and its damaging influence on Czechia staple themes that appear in the anti-system as general. If you look at the associations themselves, you'll find out that the mainstream associations are like, something which refers to the actual situation of migrants, or that migration is a challenge to EU. So both and Italy, these 2 keywords refer to the actually embarkment of migrants in that time. Whereas anti-system has many other associations, and I can give you some quotations. For example, the Hungary. This is quotation from one story of anti-system media. The Czech government and the prime minister, wherever he goes, he claims that the Czech migration politics is identical to the Hungarian approach in this area. Why then is he taking his time and not taking action? So that's one topic, or one line of reasoning, that we are not as strong as Hungary in opposing the EU policies. Illegal Africa and so on pictures a migrant or creates a negative image of migrants and stereotypization. EU member, our country, it's also an argument that leads to the fact that EU is actually responsible for migration, and the only way how to deal with it is that Czech Republic should exit EU. Global UN NGO, that's another quote. European Union cannot be reformed. The EU's bureaucratic apparatus cannot be replaced. The EU is still on its migration plans and the UN's migration plans. Step by step, the EU is implementing, organizing, and generously supporting these plans. So these are the major topics related to migration. Now, second strategy, completely different topic, completely different time. And now it's about vaccine and about how the vaccine is portrayed in anti-system media. We look at 3 periods of time: summer, autumn, and winter of 2020-21. And the chart shows a number of associated words, basically, with the word vaccine. And the yellow ones are for mainstream, the red ones are associations specific for anti-system, and the orange ones are those which are shared by those 2 segments. As you can see, at first, it is primarily a topic for mainstream media, and all the mainstream associations go from the period 1 to the period 1. So the anti-system actually accepts all the associations in the mainstream. Now, if you go the next step from the 2nd period to the 3rd, you'll find out again that all the mainstream associations are shared. That means that mainstream donates, or no, anti-system accepts all the mainstream associations and is also capable of injecting some of its own to the shared discourse. So in a way, it is parasitic on the mainstream topic, because at first it was not a topic at all for anti-system media. If you look at what are the topics that migrate, the migration from mainstream and to anti-system, these are all topics which are related to the agenda of vaccination and testing and so on. On the other hand, if you look at what's the anti-system contribution to the common discourse about vaccination, you find out that there is this Cold War topic. There is also the discussion about immunity, whether it actually gets help after vaccination and so on. Primula, that's the Ministry of Health in that time. And most importantly, Sputnik V, that's the Russian vaccination, the Russian vaccine. What it does is that, what anti-system does here is that he prepares the discourse for the discussion about accepting Russian vaccination, Sputnik, which was then boosted by Czech president, who actually started the discussion later on, but the vaccine was not accepted. But anyway, they at least tried. At the same time, mainstream and anti-system keep their own specific association. Again, with mainstream, these are like completely normal and organic, topics related to vaccinations, just number percent, Monday, Tuesday, and so on, how it went. What is specific for anti-system is a suggestion that there is some sort of pharmaceutical lobby or pharmaceutical conspiracy in which Bill Gates is involved, an army and so on. And the other topic is, or Brussels, of course, the other topic is the right or the infringement of rights and the necessity to wear mask, and if it is actually something that is in conflict with our civil rights. So these are the topics which anti-system was not capable injecting to the general discourse. Framing events is in general something that different contexts, different concepts get into different contexts. So if you look at those key terms of the political debate of last summer, it's EU or European Union, in which mainstream plays normal role, and it's mainstream is mainly interested in Czech negotiations with EU. So Babiš, name of the Czech Prime Minister, Czechia, European Prime Minister, government country. These are completely, normal topics you would expect to be related with the topic of EU. Whereas anti-system draws a different picture. It shows us that EU in relation to Russia and sanctions, supposedly that's an important word because it framed the EU as as deceptive because something supposedly should be and it was not. And it also creates the picture that EU threats our national sovereignty and self-sufficiency. So that's also another thing. In the case of Russia, there is a completely different picture. Mainstream looks at Russia in this particular time frame in respect with two topics. First is COVID, and the second one is Belarusian protests. These are two things which are mainly concerned by mainstream media, whereas anti-system again draws a different picture because anti-system associations suggest Russia plays a significant role in international scenes. There are the names of the countries, and there's the context of security and conflicts and so on. So the picture of Russia is as a superpower playing a positive international role and leadership in the world. Do I have still time? 5 minutes? Oh, yeah, that's exactly what I need. Last thing I would like to show you is the last attempt on analyzing the discourse using the time information. And we call this approach poetically companions. And companions like two words traveling in time. Like, so that's where the picture comes from. And what we do with companions is that we want to look at frequency development through time of different concepts and find out if they correlate or not. And if they correlate in the same time, it means that they actually reflect the same thing. So let's look at let's look at companions of COVID and flu. So the question is COVID just a flu? And now we look at the text in the corpus through time and calculate number of occurrences in individual days. And we can draw these lines. The red one is for chřipka, that's Czech word for flu. The bluish one is for coronavirus or COVID. So if you look at the mainstream media, you'll find out that the correlation minus 0.04 is virtually non-existent. There is no correlation at all. So these two topics are not related in time. Whereas, and I assume that you already know, if you look at the anti-system media, the picture is quite different. In this period, we find very, very high correlation of 0.92. And this actually shows us that at the beginning, that's, the February 2020, when the world was still innocent and no COVID was around, they were not interested in COVID or flu at all. But then the pandemic started in the Czech Republic, and then also the discussions whether COVID is just a flu started in the anti-system media. Going back to the mainstream, in mainstream there was this reporting about ongoing flu season as every year. Then it dropped down, and then the major topic became COVID, and flu was, uninteresting to almost everyone. So that's the difference. But, anti-system does not care about flu because, as I said, you cannot find football results in anti-system. They do not care about topics unless they can be used to some sort of geopolitical agenda. And then there is this correlation, nice correlation. Now, to wrap it up, I know, or we know that there is still a lot research to be done because we still learn how to interpret the data and how to harvest the important ones from the text. But we know that at least there are 3 systematic strategies which we found through a large period, through some range of time since, the 2017 till 2021, that these strategies systematically occur, but we know that there may be some others as well. As far as the general message of the anti-system media portals is, there are some underlying ideological current, and we can rephrase them or paraphrase them as follows: EU damaging the member states, especially Czechia, EU and NATO endangering Russia and interfering with other states. Russia is portrayed as a victim of this. Often, Russia is a superior superpower in technology as well, international politics and morals, and it can counter or help the Europe. Other topic which I did not focus on much, but is also present there, is that mainstream media cannot be trusted. And finally, the Czech Republic is portrayed as dysfunctioning state and should strive for EU and NATO exit and turn to an alliance with Russia as a leading state. So these are the major ideological currents we found in the data, but we know that there are many more. There are also many more strategies, but what we really find important here is that we can identify those topics and strategies empirically, quantitatively, and identify that they are systematically appearing in the text, not in one text, not in two texts, but throughout time. And that's, the point of my talk. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Vaclav. The next talk is by Lida, or do you have your? Yeah. Okay.
I think it's already on it's here. How much time do I have? Okay, all right. That's what it looks like. Okay. You can see it. You can see my wonderful Czechs. Hi. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My talk today addresses language shift, loss, and identity in the Czech diaspora around the world. In the first section, the making of the Czech diaspora, I will focus on the 19th century emigration waves and the reason behind the exodus of immigrants from the Czech lands, particularly through the first decades of the 20th century. Also, I will briefly draw attention to the contemporary global communities of Czechs living abroad, insofar as to accentuate their desire to raise Czech-speaking children and participate as Czech and global citizens in the Czech democracy. In the second section, I draw on my work in Texas Czech communities to illustrate the effects of asymmetrical bilingualism on language change and loss, and on the construction of identity in such language contact situations. As these processes are remarkably similar, this particular diasporic context will serve as a case study for our purposes today. I will close with a few observations on the catastrophic loss of the world's indigenous and minority languages, including those in the Czech diaspora. And because I know that we won't have time at the end, I at least want to discuss language documentation. I want to draw your attention to the logo for our Texas Czech Legacy project and invite you to visit so you can listen to the recordings of Texas Czech speech with transcripts and translations. First, let me briefly introduce the key processes and terms in language contact, shift, and loss. So community language obsolescence and loss typically result from language shift, which occurs over the course of 3 to 4 generations, and language contact situations where a smaller subordinate language gradually succumbs to the socioeconomic, political, and cultural pressures arising from the long-lasting contact with the dominant language. Reversing language shift may be possible where community activists wish to work with linguists and language policy planners to document and possibly revitalize the shifting language. Gradual language loss, which best describes the types of contexts discussed today, is a process whereby the language's functional domains shrink and its structural properties change over time. The process of language attrition in these language context situations is accelerated by incomplete acquisition, where the home, school, and community link has weakened and where institutional support from the dominant society is lacking. Language loss has been a pressing issue for both indigenous and minority languages, including the Czech diaspora. So what is the Czech diaspora and what types of emigration led to its formation? The term diaspora refers to Czech-speaking locations outside of the present-day territory of the Czech Republic, specifically the regions of Bohemia and Moravia. Some locations, such as those in Vienna and Upper Hungary, were formerly contained together with Czech lands within Austria, and after 1867 were within Austro-Hungary. Others, such as those in the Americas, were created as new immigrants settled overseas. And I'm using here this wonderful map that we have of the Czech diaspora from Cvrček 2003. The Czech diaspora formation can be explained by three major types of emigration: religious, that's from the mid-16th century until 1781. That's the issue of the patent of tolerance in Austria. Then the socioeconomic migration, especially from the 1820s to 1938, and political after 1848, then especially between 1938 and 1939, and after 1948 and 1968. They appear chronological, but may overlap. In fact, all three apply to the 19th century emigration, though the socioeconomic motivations were the main driving force then. Poverty drove out many low-wage workers and farmers from the Czech regions of Austria as early as the 1820s and later Austro-Hungary, and then smaller numbers from Czechoslovakia between 1918 and 1938. The largest waves date back to around 1890 to 1910. Before World War I, most immigrants headed for the United States, Lower Austria, especially Vienna, Germany, Russia, and fewer moved to, for example, Romania, Serbia, and Bulgaria. The post-World War I recession stimulated emigration to other European countries, such as France and Belgium, and to South America, especially Argentina, during the interwar period. Whereas intergenerational economic prospects, increased mobility, and community permeability accelerated the pace of assimilation in urban areas such as St. Louis and Chicago, Vienna, Czech descendants with some ability in Czech can still be found among elders in many historically Czech rural communities, including those in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Romania, Russia, Serbia, Ukraine, and the United States. Following the available estimates leads us to conclude that an overall total of immigrants from Bohemia and Moravia stood at over 1.7 million before 1989 and is currently at about 2.5 million. Of this number, 1.2 million left due to economic reasons before 1914. The largest number of Czechs and Slovaks, about 1.6 million, lives in the United States. After both world wars, some European Czech diasporic communities experienced re-emigration, totaling more than 100,000 each, with a smaller re-emigration happening after the Velvet Revolution in 1989. So what are then the most notable historically Czech communities in the world? The mass pre-World War emigration and the post-war shifts of state structures resulted in a paradoxical situation where by 1918, 2 out of the 3 largest Czech-speaking cities, that is Chicago and Vienna, lay abroad. In fact, in Vienna, if you can imagine, a quarter of the population was Czech by 1820. After Chicago, the 2 largest Czech-speaking cities were Cleveland and New York City. And about New York City, I wanted to insert something. The longest-lived Czech newspaper, New Yorské listy, published in New York City from 1874 till 1966, is connected with Svatava Pirková Jakobsen, who is better known as the wife of the famous linguist, Roman Jakobsen. So allow me to insert my little advertisement here. I want to draw attention to Jakobsen's wide-ranging folkloric and ethnographic research in the Czech and Slovak community in New York City and then in Texas. We have a large archive that's waiting to be cataloged and examined, and so we need help. Okay, moving on. Key rural communities in the Czech diaspora in Europe and Asia include Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, Poland, Romania, Russia, Serbia, and Ukraine. In South America, especially Argentina and Paraguay, and in North America, Canada, and the United States. There is research on all these communities, though language is best examined for Vienna, Romania, Russia, and Volhynian region in Ukraine and Serbia, and that is not connected, Ukraine, Serbia, and the Daruvar region in Croatia. Some recent work has been done on Czech in Paraguay, and there is a new thesis on Czech in the Chaco province in Argentina, which is quite exciting because it's the only one, the first one that we have. I am not focusing on Australia, but also there we now have a study on Czech in southern Australia that was just published, but that's the post-1945 and 1970s emigration. The estimated 2.5 million then Czechs live, outside the Czech Republic today. These include the new arrivals after 1989, estimated at 200,000 in 2007, as well as these descendants of Czechs in our historically Czech communities. There are at least 300 heritage organizations. A popular article on E15CZ from 2017 estimates that every sixth Czech currently lives abroad, and most of them in the United States. Here we see Czech heritage language programs worldwide in numbers, based on the work of Martha McCabe from 2017. These are either long established in the traditionally Czech areas or recently started in the areas that have experienced an influx of young professionals living in the US temporarily or long term. The most recent virtual meeting of Czech schools happened in June 2021, and an in-person conference is planned for summer 2022 in Chicago. There was also a online idea exchange event for Czech schools in the United States and Canada in 2020 that brought together 140 participants. In fact, it seems that the pandemic has basically facilitated these large meetings over Zoom and a lot of interaction. This event also showcased steady support from the Ministry of International Affairs of the Czech Republic, Czech embassies in the US and Canada, and collaboration with Czech universities. On the broader front, there's also a well-organized initiative supporting the passage of the bill that would make voting by Czech citizens living abroad easier. And so the links that I have here, they would bring you to the sources on all these wonderful things that are happening. So Czechs in America, they began to arrive to America in the second half of the 17th century as North America became one of the destinations for non-Catholic Christians seeking refuge from religious persecution in the Habsburg monarchy after the 30 Years' War. The first major immigration waves beginning in the mid-19th century brought over poor peasants, rural craftsmen, laborers, small farmers, particularly from northeastern Bohemia and northeastern Moravia, as well as free thinkers and post-1848 political refugees. Emigration of Czechs to America took form of chain migration as families and neighbors followed the first pioneers from their hometowns to often newly built settlements overseas. Nearly 400,000 Bohemians and Moravians came to the United States between 1850 and 1950. The influx slowed after the birth of the Czechoslovak Republic in 1918 and was further curtailed by the US Quota Acts in the 1920s, which had the biggest impact on Southern and Eastern European countries. The most recent US Census reports 1.7 million Americans claiming Czech or Czechoslovakian ancestry. The strongest years of American Czech span from, I think I wanted to show you this map. This is where they went, but you already saw it in the numbers also. The strongest years of American Czech span from the 1890s through the 1930s. The number of actual Czech speakers in America has been difficult to estimate. There may be over 47,000 Czech speakers today, but this number is too broad to represent the remaining speakers of the historic Czech diaspora in the US. So now that we know a little bit about moving to the United States, then building a new home in Texas. While the district chain migration to Texas from the impoverished Moravian and Bohemian regions of Austria and then Austro-Hungary began in the 1850s, the major emigration waves fall between the 1870s and 1920s. First Czechs began to settle in Texas in 1847. Most settlements were built within the Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio triangle, reaching south to Corpus Christi area. Many in the proximity to those already built by Germans. Up to 80% of Czech Moravians in the state were Catholic, and being a Catholic or a Protestant has remained an important aspect of Texas Czech identity to this day. The settlers built their own churches, schools, dance halls, and fraternal, religious, and theatrical organizations. They patronized their own businesses, stores, and pubs, and published their own newspapers. Among about 30 Czech periodicals published in Texas before World War II was also Našinec, that is the longest lasting, really, Czech language newspaper in Texas that was published in Texas from 1914 to 2018. As for Czech speakers in Texas, the 2010 census records about 8,700 of them out of 136,000 persons of Czech and Czechoslovak descent. But again, we don't know how many of these are self-identified diasporic speakers. So the making of it as the diasporic language, how does that happen? So language maintenance in the Czech diaspora has been affected by the usual sociolinguistic factors such as location, being insulated or permeable, community relations, family customs such as gradual acceptance of intermarriage, feasibility of intergenerational language transmission, age of the community, religion, of course, types of employment, and access to heritage language education. Even so, while the cards tend to be stacked against the diasporic variety from the beginning, the Czech diaspora occasionally evidences non-Czechs who learned the local variety by living and working around Czechs, including African Americans working on Texas Czech farms. So Texas Czech is then a critically endangered diasporic variety of Czech. It is a blend of archaic Eastern Moravian dialects, especially those from the northern or Wallachian region or subgroup, and Silesian or Lachian dialects, especially from the Frenchstadt subgroup, as you see these marked on the map, with traces of Central Moravian from the Hana region. That would be a good point, right? Yeah, but most of them came from that end, and also from southwestern, northeastern Bohemian, and then southwestern Bohemian dialects as well. And then they are also mixed, of course, these dialects with the school Czech and with English spoken in Texas. Compared to this is a different map, and it's based on research done. The research was based on collecting the tombstone or looking at the tombstone inscriptions in various communities and identifying the locations. Compared to other American Czech varieties, such as those in Minnesota, Nebraska, and Kansas, or Wisconsin, Texas Czech is unique in that the dialect concentration in its baseline overwhelmingly originates in Eastern Moravia and Silesia. Like other minority languages, Texas Czech is marked by a shift toward a dominant language, a divergent grammar, and very limited use. In the process of language shift, three major processes we may call deceleration, acceleration, and attrition in contact are at play. We see these processes at work across all diasporic language varieties. In Texas Czech, deceleration in isolation has aided retention of some archaic dialectal features. Attrition in contact and incomplete acquisition have dramatically reshaped the immigrant baseline, and acceleration has nudged to the surface certain language changes that are progressing at a slower pace in the homeland Czech. To give a few examples for Texas Czech, with the slowing down of change, that is deceleration, Texas Czech has retained the archaic pluralis respectivus to refer to family and other respective elders. So if you could just read the English translation, Tatínek hajdu oni měli farmu, so that oni is plural, měli is plural, and referring to a singular person. So that's one of the things that you don't find on the territory of the Czech Republic anymore. There are some other features, but just to give you one example. Acceleration, on the other hand, means that some tendencies that are already present in the source language tend to spread faster and wider through the contact language system, where standard Czech has negligible influence. So in Texas Czech, acceleration shows in the overuse of pronominal subjects where Czech doesn't need them and English does. So very possibly the influence of the dominant language. Also in the overuse of demonstrative determiners. So here you have an example like já taky odebírám ten našinec. So prefacing it with that demonstrative determiner ten. So these tendencies exist on the territory of the Czech Republic, but they are much more pronounced than in the diasporic context. Language attrition in contact results in a reduced and reanalyzed version of the source language, such as, including blending in form, innovation, restructuring. Loan blends and calques are almost the most obvious examples, among the most obvious examples. So we have some nouns here in house, drugstore, pixák, verbs like trajbovat, pikovat, hontovat, which would be to drive, to pick, to hunt. Adjectives like brown and pink, which would be brownové, pinkové. Then also calques, so loan translations following, basically copying or replicating the word order and the structure. Tetka udělají děcka topit, which is auntie will make the kids drink it. And loan shifts where you would, you have an example here, moja sestra šla do České republiky, which is literally she went on foot, where you actually need a more specific verb, which would be to fly. So these are just very few examples. These are also predictable. There are also predictable differences in how different levels of the minority language respond to the pressures of asymmetrical language contact. So lexicon, derivational morphology, pre-function morphemes such as conjunctions, prepositions, discourse markers, numerals, they go first. They are less stable, they are more permeable. While phonology, inflectional morphology, and other aspects of morphosyntax, such as grammatical agreement, are more stable and less permeable. So how did the shift in the Texas Czech community happen? First, there is borrowing, which is nothing unusual and happens almost among the healthy languages all the time. So in the Czech Republic, notebooky is notebooks, and it's like in Texas, boxy, which is boxes. In asymmetrical bilingualism, however, minority language speakers begin to shift toward the majority language, at which point additional morphosyntactic and phonological changes begin creeping in. At this point, borrowing becomes more of an imposition. That's the term of banquetism, and I'll show you some references later on, exceeding the need and beginning to affect core vocabulary as well. While prestige and need motivate both borrowing and imposition in asymmetrical situations, what is generally seen as enriching and tolerable and controllable for a healthy language in borrowing becomes an encroachment upon the weakening language system under imposition, not least because of shifting language ideologies and loyalties. By the 1900s, Texas Czech leaders' patriotic calls for mother tongue maintenance gave into pragmatism by promoting Czech-English bilingualism. Between the 1920s and 1940s, the pressures of assimilation increased, further eroding in the spirit of what you have here, čeština není nutná k živobytí, as I was also once told, Czech is not needed to make a living. The prestige and communicative value of immigrant Czech, which spelled the end of intergenerational language transmission in Texas Czech households after World War II. Younger generations began leaving family farms, and intermarriage, still rare through the 1920s, became commonplace. The language incompletely acquired during childhood, further sidelined by a monolingual language policy in schools, continued to recede with fast diminishing exposure in the family domain as the last bastion of life support. Moravian Czech, once linguistically and socially dominant within a remarkably resilient and self-sufficient community, was forced to abandon relative isolation and gradually shifted under the pressure of intense contact with English, displaying the signs of systematic change, typical for endangered languages under the agency of the linguistically and socially dominant language. So this is the story that you could basically write, or that would apply to any of those diasporic varieties. It's very, very similar. So as far as shifting identities, first I'd like to briefly clarify the long time adherence to regional identities among Texas Czechs has an explanation. Just like most Slavic peoples in the 19th century Europe, Bohemians and Moravians lacked independence and therefore a concrete concept of national identity. The process of language standardization during the national revival period in the Czech lands was barely settled before Moravian and Bohemian immigrants began leaving for North America. That is why the first settlers and subsequent generations traced their origin to distinct dialectal regions, and most continue to identify as Moravian-speaking Moravci, which is Moravians, or Texas Moravian-speaking Moravštinu, Moravian, through the late 1990s. They also didn't like the label Bohemians because of the connotation associated with the word Bohemian in English. Self-identifications as Texas Czechs prevalent today began to increase after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Even though the heyday of self-sufficient Czech Moravian communities is long gone, Texas Czechs continue to proudly affirm their Czechness at festivals, church picnics, polka dances, genealogy workshops, heritage organization meetings. Also, to tell you here we have the classes, community language classes. Many cultural events are held at the Texas Czech Heritage and Cultural Center in LaGrange, complete with the Texas Czech Village, which is an open-air museum, a powerful statement testament to the community's collective heritage-motivated efforts. These events create spaces conducive to small talk exchanges in Texas Czech, such as greetings and teasing and weather talk, various interjections. So if you again just follow the English, so the exchange could go like, jak se máš, jak starý pes, jak práca ide, pomalý a furt. On je nejlepší, když spí, jej danečky, dobrý den, s pánem Bohem, zapršat by mělo. So basically the little tokens that they can insert and then express their identity. Such events are also conducive to singing with Texas Czech bands and for the display of Czech slogans on baseball caps, t-shirts, buttons, bumper stickers, and other merchandise. My personal favorite is made in America from Czech parts. An early result of community efforts, the Czech endowment funded by Czechs and established at the University of Texas at Austin in 1915 assures that Czech continues to be taught. Czech is still taught at a community college in Schulenburg and occasionally in community language classes at the TCHCC. Music and wearing costumes, imported or Tex Czech made, in particular, are enjoyable and convenient signifiers of ethnic belonging. They are outward expressions of Texas Czechness, meaningfully complementing the residual context of ancestral language use. In my earlier work, I examined the symbolic or emblematic and situational dimensions of Texas Czech identity, suggesting that any measures of authenticity are irrelevant to the dynamics of ethnicity, as the generations in such diasporic communities continuously recreate and adapt their sense of ethnic belonging to maintain the symbolic boundaries of their community. Understanding of ambiguity, fluidity, and hybridity of any social identification in context is nothing new. The symbolic or emblematic and the situational dimensions express the fact that displaying certain identities when the occasion calls for it conveniently satisfies one's conscious and intentional longing for belonging and is a matter of one's choice. Fishman's classic definition of ethnicity as a continuity of being, doing, and knowing makes it possible to name and explore the disconnect between ethnic doing and ethnic knowing in such communities. Seeing language in ethnicity reflects its diminishing role as a crucial criterion for the shaping of ethnic identity. In an immigrant community like that of Texas Czechs, having the language is no longer essential to ethnic self-identification. Yet both the idea of the group and the idea of having the heritage language which one does not need to speak in order to be self or other identified as a true Czech continues to help maintain symbolic community boundaries. In summary, intentionality, conscious reflection, and its voluntary nature are the main ingredients of emblematic ethnicity. And the situational dimension draws our attention to the performative aspects of identity and to its participatory nature, dependent on the context which brings it to life. The intersection of symbolic and situational, relying on the idea of language rather than the actual use, underscored by the meaningful communal and familial ties forged through generations, appears to be the best way to describe Texas Czech identity. So that's my wonderful Texas Czechs. Now, just a few words on this important topic to conclude. So a simple Google search tells us that there are roughly 6,500 spoken languages in the world today, and that about 2,000 of those languages have fewer than 1,000 speakers. The Living Tongue Institute for Endangered Languages estimates that nearly half of these world languages, with the most endangered areas being identified as language hotspots, is expected to vanish by the year 2100, causing a devastating loss to biolinguistic diversity and human knowledge. Saving linguistic diversity is not just a problem for linguists to resolve, nor does studying endangered languages merely satisfy our scientific interest. Caring for our languages as much as we care for our planet, that is caring more on both fronts, means sustaining sociolinguistic diversity, which in turn makes our species both stronger and smarter. Therefore, we must continue to document languages that cannot be saved and work to reverse shift where there's still a chance and community will to do it. In the context of these losses, a challenging question pertaining to immigrant languages is, does the existence of a healthy language elsewhere make losing its far removed variety any more acceptable? Our answer to this question is unlikely to make a difference for the languages in the historical Czech diaspora, but it can make a difference to language maintenance among the new wave of Czechs living abroad. One last thing, I have participated in some of these debates with the politicians, Czech politicians, as the organizers were running the Zoom sessions on the voting rights for Czech citizens abroad, basically just making it a little bit more convenient so that people actually can vote. And so during the time, some of those politicians voiced things like, the perception of Czechs living abroad is that they are not Czech enough, that they are traitors. And so as I was thinking about it, I was thinking that bringing the understanding of the formation and history of the Czech diaspora could actually start in schools, which is not a novel thing. I mean, it's quite obvious, really. but that incorporating this into the curriculum, where in schools, the schools are already in business of educating Czech, European, and global citizens, might be a good idea. That is not going to help save these Balkan communities again, but we can learn from history for a better future about the language, community, identity, and perseverance in adversity. We can promote, support, and celebrate Czech at home and around the world, because we do have a great advantage over the 19th century immigrants. We have open borders, we have transnational mobility, and we have a wide array of ways of staying connected. Thank you. The other references? Here's a thank you slide.
So we'll turn to the discussants, and
You need to finish it, I think. Something.
Okay. Thank you very much. So would you like to start your comments and questions?
Sure. I should start. So first of all, thanks very much for these really interesting presentations. And I had a lot of thoughts when I was listening to them, and some of them I think connect to each other, but mostly I think the papers or the presentations stand alone in many respects and have interesting problems connected to them. And for Vaclav, I was wondering, first of all, whether you said that you didn't want to deal with the cybernetic aspects in terms of machines or computers. By the same token, I'm wondering if the focus on language implies that humans can be kind of programmed, and what, in terms of when they see these associations, that they will somehow pick them up and integrate them, and then that they will run this new program, if you will. I mean, that disinformation works with some kind of program understanding of humans as reprogrammable in some respects. And I'm wondering if, like, how do you see language as as programming language, or do you see language as code in some respects for reprogramming the psyche? And what, if so, like, what are the fault lines or discussions about how to counter disinformation if disinformation aims at reprogramming? Is the aim then to not be programmable, or is it the aim to counter program, or what is it if it's framed in those terms? I also wondered whether size matters for the purposes of cybersecurity. Czech Republic is a relatively small country. It's also a smaller linguistic space. And but you also mentioned that there's a lot of movement across contexts. The translation goes from English and it happens very fast in multiple contexts. How does one think about security in the context of something that's already and intentionally global? How does one see, what aspects are aimed at a specific national target? For example, you showed the map of how Czech Republic is on this kind of, cusp. So how does one know when it's kind of general, everybody's getting it, and it's kind of scattershot? And how does one know when it's really about Czech politics, especially when they don't, you said, talk about local news items, they don't talk about the weather, they don't talk about baseball or basketball games, I'm assuming not baseball. But do they interpret local news in light of geopolitical issues, or do they make the local into the geopolitical, like in vaccination, for example? It gets very geopolitical very fast. And also, we've seen instances like with Macedonia, but also with Russia as a not very militarily advanced state, nonetheless being very successful with cyber activity on a relatively, one presumes, low budget. And so are there opportunities for smaller states in terms of, like, do you have to be big in order to think about these things for certain purposes, because you have to have the research and computing capacity to analyze the data in real time, or does it actually help to be a bit smaller for some purposes? Also, I was interested in how, that like these disinformation campaigns, there's some kind of loopy logic within them. They're kind of like the protocols of the elders of Zion, and that they outline a conspiracy and they are a conspiracy. And so you can't say, don't believe conspiracies, but believe this one. So how does one counter something that loops back in on the whole notion of conspiracy like this? So in some like rhetorical realm, like what are the strategies for thinking about counter disinformation, or the various considerations in those regards? Like, so what is the next step after research such as this? Also, there's something kind of intriguingly incoherent about, like when you had the Bannon quote about flooding with shit, there's something kind of seemingly almost, and I don't know if it's deliberate, but super incoherent about the messaging. So on the one hand, the virus is not a real thing. On the other hand, we have a vaccine, and our vaccine is better than others, and we have the first vaccine. On the one hand, states are bad because they get in the way of your life, but this state, and so there's no kind of consistent content within the messaging, even though there are sort of clusters of issues around, and actually it contradicts itself in many ways. And I was wondering in terms of, and sometimes this contradiction seems to self-harm Russia, like with vaccination, saying whether it's real or not, and like touting one's own vaccine, like this arguably came to bite a lot of the Russian population ultimately, it's unclear how this serves a country that's already experiencing paranoid population decline. And so I was wondering if its lack of coherence indicates like a kind of, like that this maybe isn't a strategy. It's kind of multiple strategies in competition with one another, or that the competition is part of the strategy, or the scattershotness of it is part of the strategy. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on that. For Lida's presentation, I really thought this was interesting and made me think of some time that I spent with ethnic Hungarians in Novi Sad, or in northern Serbia and in Transylvania. And one of the observations that I made living among ethnic Hungarians in these areas is that, they would make very strict rules about when two children would be mixing languages, they would stop them and say one or the other, but not both. And they were also quite, I was really excited that the languages retained their integrity over centuries, really. But on the inside, what that often looked like is incredible chauvinism, just real, really harsh attitudes towards anyone who was kind of out group. And it was this contrast whereby, whereby the preservation of the language was cast in oftentimes very, well, not to put it too fine a point on it, very chauvinistic terms, like that we're better than them, and so we have to keep our language intact. And also there was another thing that was kind of a pattern, and that was this sense that some form of persecution was not necessarily a bad thing, because this sense of being on the defensive like helped the preservation of language. And I actually heard a journalist in Hungary say, heaven forbid the Serbian state should ever like really just let us have our schools and, our newspapers and not bother us, and this would be the end of the Hungarian community in Serbia, something along those lines. And so that there's some sense where, where friction is kind of like, conceived for some purposes as necessary in order not to lose consciousness, like not to sort of slip into, bilingualism that then becomes, like a different monolingualism. Within this community, people were quite critical of people who slipped, a little bit out of it. And this was another way of kind of keeping these boundaries. And in the context of a world in which, like oftentimes the politics of preservationism of things, like in Hungary now, for example, this embattled sense that there are, kind of enemies all around and we have to keep immigrants out so that we keep our language intact. I'm wondering if there's a way to think differently, but also practically about retaining the diversity of small languages, because oftentimes the concrete manifestation of it is, like not pretty. And so are there ways to think about it? Like you said, in some respects, interconnection is great. In other respects, interconnection doesn't necessarily help to maintain linguistic integrity because it, encourages mixing like on chat channels and, things can get watered down in those mixes as well. But is there a way to think about retaining a diversified linguistic biosphere? I can't remember the word you used, it was great. Without, or in a different key, for example, both in terms of like the politics of it and the mood of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I go or let them respond? I'll try and be brief, and then we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. So I do see the papers as connected, and I think that to me the unifying principle is a focus on the Czech Republic and on Czech identity as being under serious threat, and that the vectors are different, but the unifying principle is that Czech identity, Czech culture, what it means to be a Czech is under threat. And I don't think it's hyperbole to say it's almost genocidal threat. I mean, if you do the numbers and if you look at Lida's paper and where it's headed, if in 85 years nobody speaks Czech, that means the equivalent of a kind of genocide. There are no more Czechs. If no one's speaking Czech, there are no more Czechs, period. So let me put that not quite so dramatically, but say that's at least a possibility to the extent that we associate identity with language in a fundamental way. Then if no one's speaking the language, then there is no identity. And then Vaclav's paper has a different kind of vector, which is much more sort of narrowly political, but again, putting Czech identity and what it means to be a Czech under threat. So let me just quickly review just a few comments, I think. So Vaclav's paper highlights Czech political space under attack by a systematic campaign of disinformation by the Russian Federation. You could see this as, to use a hackneyed metaphor, the canary in the coal mine. As Lida points out toward the end of her paper, the Czech Republic isn't just the Czech Republic, it's a representative of all of us. We are all the Czech Republic in some way. And this could be the beginning of a series of threats that other nations have faced. For example, most North Americans are really familiar with the fact that a serious Russian disinformation campaign helped put Donald J. Trump into the presidency in 2016. And that, a lot of my students would debate about when it was that cyber attacks actually resulted in the first human fatality. And usually it's cited that a woman in Germany who was getting ready for surgery, her surgery was delayed because of a ransomware attack. And as a result, she died before she could get the surgery that would save her life. But I would submit to you that at least a third of the US COVID deaths are due to misinformation and disinformation, some of which is a deliberate and systematic campaign of the Russian Federation. They're very, very good at it. And they find Americans a fat target. So the Czech Republic and the United States both share that they have been the targets of these campaigns. I would say that this is putting in some context of Russian foreign policy. Since Putin's rise to power, it's been characterized by mainly negative foreign policy objectives. And when I think about that, I think Putin should hear from my mother. When I was young, she used to admonish me. She'd say, Ivan, if you want to feel better about yourself, you should go out and do something to be proud of rather than put other people down. But Russia's foreign policy has been exactly that. It's limited by hyper-corruption from a positive program of increasing its power. So it's found cheap measures to essentially weaken all of its possible adversaries. And its two big targets, no surprise, are the European Union, which is a major economic competitor, and then NATO. And its use of disinformation, misinformation, and cyber attacks that that use text and language have been creative and been highly effective in weakening both of those rivals. To the extent that they're weakened without having to reform at all, Putin's Russia becomes by default more powerful and more influential. So that's been sort of Russian foreign policy. A couple of questions just methodologically is that when in Russia's disinformation attacks against the United States, they use a lot of images along with text. So we could consider memes. How would your methodology, which is really text discourse analysis based, how would it incorporate the use of imagery, the use of symbols that aren't encoded into text as part of that? Do they enhance, that's sort of just a methodological question. And also on a more hopefully positive note, neither you or Lida had any good news at the end, really. Moving beyond identifying attacks by Russia against the Czech Republic, is there a strategy to counter Russian disinformation? I mean, Estonia has a couple of, it's a small state with a fairly small linguistic footprint, but they've pioneered since 2007, some pretty good counter disinformation campaign methods. So is Ukraine. Ukraine has its own television network, which has a sort of almost a game show every night where they highlight Russian disinformation and then out it. So I'm wondering if the Czech Republic could either adopt or innovate and use some of your methods to actually identify and then target and counter that. Could your linguistic analysis method be used to train an AI, an artificial intelligence, to both cheaply identify disinformation in the way that AIs are now being used and trained to identify deepfakes? So deepfakes are another form of attack where somebody's appearance or voice are very carefully cloned or duplicated in a way that makes it more and more difficult for humans to tell the difference between the fake and the real. And that technology is accelerating. And I'm wondering if your methods could actually be used to train AIs to do the same thing, which would be really exciting because it would be a cheap countermeasure to Russian attacks. Lida's paper details an ongoing threat to Czech language and by extension, Czech identity and culture. I see this as a more fundamental threat than disinformation, but it's not the only, not only the Czech Republic that would lose if Czech language becomes extinct, to the extent, and this is a big debate in philosophy forever, to the extent that diversity of language and diversity of thought are linked, the extension of Czech language leaves us with one less way to identify and solve problems that affect all of us as humans. For example, climate change. I think if we're going to solve that, we're going to need to solve that as humans. No single country has the solution to that. And the more diversity of thought we have, the more likely we are to innovate a way to save our species and a lot of species connected to us from extinction. And that's a critical issue. I would compare the threat of language loss through globalization, which has been accelerated and intensified by internet interaction, to the problem of monoculture and large-scale agriculture. Monoculture facilitates some short-term efficiencies at the cost of long-term destruction of soil and the need to treat crops with powerful chemicals to protect from biothreats and facilitate growth. In linguistic terms, monoculture facilitates concentrating short-term profits for internet platforms at the long-term cost of destroying global intellectual capital and resilience. So for you, Lida, what strategies might we employ to halt the loss of linguistic diversity? I know in one of your papers of yours that I read, and you touched on a little bit in your talk, there can be concerted efforts to halt language loss like this. And could we turn the medium that's currently accelerating that loss, let's say interaction in cyberspace, which is currently mediated by English-centric platforms like Facebook, could we figure out a way to deploy those to stop and then preserve linguistic and thought diversity? And I'll just close with that.
Okay. Thank you for your cues. I don't know if I have A's. So, first, the Holly's question about the programming. I mean, that's a concept which is being dealt by several linguistic theories. In corpus linguistics, we use the term lexical or any priming, that we are primed to do something or to hear something. In cognitive linguistics, we also have the concept of prototype, and it in a sense works in this topic and in general language as well. So for example, if I say on one hand you would be primed to hear that there's somewhere on the other hand also. And in this sense, systematic co-occurrence of associations primes us to view a concept with this association. So if you're an regular reader of anti-system media portals, you might be prone to interpret immigration as illegal, because that's the priming that they actually do. So any migration is illegal, and this is just one case which is really visible, but there are perhaps more of them underneath, which we acquire by reading the text, and we do not even know about it. So yes, in a sense, and if we focus on, for example, Facebook groups and Facebook posts of groups which are, frequently sharing the content of anti-system media, and if you analyze the post, you'll find out that they actually repeat some of the primings, and they use it in their own expression. So that's one thing. And a related question, which was posed by both of you, how to counter this disinformation, and if the method can actually help to build some counteractions. I'm not sure at the time being. What we do is that, okay, the major problem is that we cannot say for sure that something is disinformation. We can just simply state that something in anti-system is framed completely different from what we would expect in the mainstream, and that's an alert. That's something that should gives you draws your attention to the problem, because there's something going on. So if for example the migration is more connected to Dublin negotiations, these are the quotas in EU, in the anti-system media, it means something. It actually means that they want to propagate this topic and this relation between EU as something sponsoring or organizing the migration and so on. So the only thing, how can we counter disinformation, is to expose them and to let the people be aware of them. So that's the only thing. But the problem is, how can we identify what disinformation actually is? Because that's a scale, and we can only say that something is different, mainstream and anti-system. As far as the global and domestic agenda, there are, of course, some nation-specific topics in anti-system media. The specific situation in Czech is that there is also web portal which is officially financed by Russian government. It's called Sputnik News. That's similar to the vaccine, but it's no connection there. Sputnik News. And this portal actually broadcasts in many languages, not just Czech, and it's officially owned by Russian government and so on. So this is just one portal that tries to represent the Russian discourse in Czech, but the other portals often clone text from Sputnik. They reproduce their points of view, but they also include domestic issues, especially when they are related to these global or geopolitical ones. So there are some domestic issues, but only when it helps promoting the global ones. That's my point of view. I don't know if Marco can add something, but my point of view that this is the major strategy. And as far as the conspiracies and the loop within them, that's a tough one. That's a tough question. And I was lucky that I've been in touch with my colleagues in the Faculty of Arts who are involved in the religious studies, and they perceive all the conspiracy business, all the business around conspiracies, as a manifestation of some villages, actually, or they call it conspirituality, because it has something in common. And one of the points, one of the key points here is that you cannot argue against one's spirituality, because that's, you know, a logic proof situation. You know, that's something you cannot win. And so there is this idea, I'm not sure if it will work, but, you know, it is better not to counter disinformation like from the positions of the logic, but from positions of similar spirituality. So in a sense, it works better if someone says, I understand your feelings, I have the same one because I believe, I don't know, in this particular thing. And so it in a sense, it might be a better way how to counter the disinformation. Yeah, but yeah, it has some features of spirituality. And a related question is to the Steve Bannon's quote. You know, the contradictority of it. I think one way to look at the stories produced by Anti-System is to look at it as evolution in you know, evolutionary process. I assume, I don't know how the infrastructure actually works, but let's assume that they create, I don't know, 100 stories and they let them live in the discourse. And one of them is actually successful because it rings the bell for many readers. And the 99 of them die out because they were not successful. And so it might be the case that they are contradictory because, you know, it worked. So they do not, I mean, the anti-system media probably do not control over the consistency of the content they actually produce. They control only what is effective, how it works, if it's shared, if it's liked, if there are interactions on Facebooks and Twitter and so on. So it does not really matter that it contradicts to what we've said yesterday. If it works, then it's okay. And that's the case of actually the vaccination, because it was not a problem. COVID was not a problem. Then there was this phase in which they said, we have the vaccine. So in a sense, they had to admit that it is a problem. And then again, when the Czech Republic decided not to use Sputnik as a vaccine, then it was not a problem again. So nowadays they are still anti-wearing masks and so on. So that this is going on. As for the Ivan's questions specifically, we've seen the spread of the disinformation portals is in last decade. It's basically since Russia invaded Crimea.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the moment in which we've seen many of them begin to function and spread. Some of them are known to be financed by Russian government. Some of them are maybe, you know, just volunteers. I don't know whom, but they are usually anonymous, so we cannot know for sure. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, we do not have as many Chinese propaganda pages. I know only of one, which is broadcasting in Czech. It's like CRI, China Radio International, I think. And that's the only similarly oriented page of Chinese, so to say, origin. Images, yeah, that's a problem. And to be honest, at the time being, we cannot do anything about images, but that's definitely a complement to our analysis, mm-hmm. which is text-based, as you mentioned, and it should be definitely something worth trying, or worth finding someone who's capable of this analysis, because I'm not capable of doing this. Marco's better in this, perhaps. But yes, definitely. And I think that in case of the Russia collusion with the 2016 election, it was more pronounced in the social networks than it is, as I see it, in the Czech disinformation niveau.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the major question. I can answer whatever you like further, but let's let Lida to answer.
Well, I'll be really brief. I just wanted to ask, as far as the Novi Sad community, would you know what generation? How long ago was it? Was it actually the language being transmitted within the family?
Yeah. And I mean, these were Hungarians who had been in this region for hundreds of years. And so in some respects, autochthonous, I guess.
It's interesting. I wonder if it might be because the parents really get impatient with the children. It's ultimately what I'm trying to say is ultimately the kids decide. And so that's the issue that the community language schools have the biggest problem with, right? So the parents bring the children to school, maybe, through maybe the middle school. And once they are high schoolers, they just say, no more, that's it, I'm not doing it. And that's where it stops. So there are definitely less isolationist or friction-free strategies for doing this, like, one parent, one language strategy, or you can have one context and one language kind of strategy. And now I'm thinking about all kinds of wonderful resources that like when I was raising my boys and wanted to have them, wanted them to speak Czech, I did not have access to all the kind of resources that you can so easily have now. So I don't know why those parents would feel the way they did, because it's very, very possible. Now, as far as that them and us kind of contrasting, then that definitely was an issue in Texas, and the oldest generations will still think about it and tell me about it. So Americans would not be, they would not be doing things right. We were doing things right. Germans are getting on our nerves all the time, and so don't associate with them. So, they would comment on the yards, who had better yards and things like that. So it's definitely it was, Americans, and then, it was them. These days, it really does not seem to be, that much of an issue. They're just proud that they have these exact borders, that's how that identity, then the Czech identity, became more defined, from all these regions that they came from, and just put on that identity when the time is right for it, right? So I guess I would need to know a little bit more about. I need to look into it to see, what the numbers and what's available in those communities and things like that. As far as what could be done, that was, I think, Ivan's question. So it's really, it boils down to the community will and wish. And if they don't wish it, then the linguists cannot do anything about it. So, having design something and come into the community and say, hey, throw the money at them and say, we are going to do this, we have a grant, we need to, produce teaching materials, this is what we are doing. It's not going to happen. So it would have to be, again, grassroots from within the community, younger people in these heritage organizations, or just basically maybe forward-looking thinking. So let's orient our activities a little bit more toward language, you know, from, I don't know, electing the Czech and Slovak queen, you know, parading in costumes. Maybe we just need to spend a little bit of time on the language itself. So utility is really central to it. And I know that, you know, these cooking classes and things like that, that's really like learning from what's done in some tribal nations where we try to revitalize the language, you know, that they have these apprenticeship programs and things like that. So, you know, those are useful community language classes, but really a community is at the center of it.
Mhm. Yeah, one thing the Hungarians have done lately is instituted a program that's sort of like Israel's, where you can repatriate yourself at the expense of the state for some period in order to, which is, you know, it has its own, like, I mean, once again, this is, you know, this is Orban and you know, all that comes with it. But this is an express effort to get members of the diaspora to retain linguistic capacity.
Yeah, and we sent, actually, Charles, I think, sends lecturers to Serbia as well. Czech students who are, they are preparing to be teachers of Czech as a foreign language, and then they, you know, they go maybe for 6 months or something, you know, to Serbia as well to teach. But yeah.
Well, I think we actually fulfilled our plan.
Yeah.
And so, if do you have any questions from the floor?
Thank you for staying so long, everybody.
If you have, you would like to talk to the speakers and discussing, we'll be here a little more. I think you probably have things to talk about, but I guess we need to officially close our panel. And thank you so much for staying for such a long time and listening to us with interest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.